We know the Istari, Gandalf and the others, the 5 wizards of Middle-earth. But what precisely was their mission, and how capable were they? Let's take a look individually at other recordings, but I thought I'd bring it all together here to view them as a whole. What their mission was, what their nature was like, and how capable they were. Let's begin with the essentials. The word Istari is the Quenya Elvish term that's translated into our language as wizard. Although it holds a broader meaning than just magic user, it implies wise or learned one, someone with a detailed knowledge of history, lore, and the world. The word may have been in use earlier, but it became specifically associated with the 5 clearly ancient beings who appeared in Middle-earth around the year 1000 of the Third Age and formed some kind of order. It's probably worth pointing out at this stage that the precise nature of that order and who the Istari were was obscure to nearly everyone in Middle-earth. Apparently, only Elrond, Galadriel, and Círdan truly knew. In fact, even the idea that these 5 were connected was likely beyond most people, as they certainly didn't act like they were among mortal peoples who met them. It was assumed that they were just long-lived beings who had contemplated long and hard for their wisdom and abilities. Keep in mind that at that time, some men were long-dwelling Sauron, but eventually, it became clear even to people that these Istari were living too long and were too consistent to be any kind of real human. So most accepted they were indeed beings of some kind, and they even named them as such. Gandalf, the title that the Istari went by among mankind, actually means elf with a staff or wand. It's essentially just a depiction of who they thought he was. The critical point here is that while this video will outline who the Istari are, what powers they have and their limitations, that was not known to the vast majority of individuals in Middle-earth. Most did not know that they were undying and capable Maiar, only in the guise of ancient men. This mystery is in stark contrast to the first time those 5 were sent on a mission to Middle-earth, although there were 6 of them at that time. This was hinted at in the published materials we already had from Tolkien, but it was only with the publication of The Silmarillion that we got the details. When the elves first awoke in Middle-earth back in the mists of time, the Valar chose to invite them to stay with them in the Undying Lands instead of remaining where they were. This made sense from several viewpoints, but one of them was that the Valar were preparing to wage war once more on Morgoth. And the last time they had done that, it had been pretty devastating for the world. While the Valar were off planning for that, they left the 5 Guardians, as they were known, plus Melian the Maiar, to protect the elves. The reasoning here by the Valar seems pretty clear. We'll send some of our most powerful Maiar, who can reassure the elves by their presence. However, it seems that having such clearly powerful beings just hanging around watching over the elves made some of the elves begin to question the motives of the Valar. Some thought, the Valar clearly do exist, but they have abandoned Middle-earth as the appointed realm of the Quendi. Now they are becoming jealous and wish to control the Quendi as vassals and thus repossess themselves of Middle-earth. The Quendi, of course, is what the elves call themselves. The result was that some of the elves rejected the Valar's strong suggestion that they accompany them to the Undying Lands, and still more only went part way before stopping. The Valar learned the important lesson that sometimes a show of strength and telling people what to do just makes them dig in their heels a bit more. It's much better to step back and encourage. So the next time they sent those Maiar to Middle-earth to help out, they opted for a different approach. No open displays of power this time. Instead, these Maiar would be clad in bodies as men, real and not feigned, but subject to the fears, pains, and exhaustion of the world, able to suffer from hunger and thirst and be killed. However, because of their noble spirits, they did not die and aged only by the cares and labours of many long years. The Valar did this hoping to correct the mistakes of the past, particularly that they had attempted to watch over and isolate the Eldar by their own might and grandeur. While now their emissaries were forbidden to reveal themselves in forms of beauty, or to seek to dominate the wills of men or elves through open displays of power, but coming in shapes weak and humble, they were bidden to advise and persuade men and elves to do good, and to seek to unite in love and understanding all those whom Sauron, should he come again, would endeavour to dominate and corrupt. So that's why the Istari appeared as old men. We'll get back to the details of what that means in a moment. But first, who were they actually? And how bought into this mission were they? Saruman, whose real name was Curunír, was the chief and wisest of the Order. As a Maya, he was attached to Oa the Smith, and when the Valar decided to send some Maids to Middle-earth, he was one of only 2 who stepped forward, so he was clearly keen to go and keen to take the lead. We know what happened to him in Middle-earth, but he was clearly already proud and rather haughty as a Maya, and as one of Owl's Mayas, his fascination with the craft of ring-making was perhaps also easy to predict. Alar, one of the 2 blue wizards, was the other Mer to step forward for the mission. He took his friend Palando with him. They had both been attached to the Valar Arrow the Huntsman. And to be honest, we don't know huge amounts about them, because Tolkien didn't either. He wrote in 1958 that I really do not know anything clearly about the other 2, since they do not concern the history of the Northwest. I think they went as emissaries to distant regions east and south, far out of Númenórean range, missionaries to enemy-occupied lands. As it were, what success they had. I do not know, but I fear that they failed, as Saruman did, though doubtless in different ways, and I suspect they were founders or beginners of secret cults and magic traditions that outlasted the fall of Sauron. The other 2 Istari seem less keen to have gone. Gandalf, whose real name was Alan, was commanded to go by Maine himself, even though he was afraid of Sauron and Radagast. Real name Iandil only went because Yavanna begged Saruman to take him along with him. This is an interesting wrinkle in the dynamics of the Istari, because Yavanna is the Valar associated with nature, and Radagast clearly also values nature highly. But why was Yavanna so insistent that her representative go to Middle-earth? Might it have been to counter what she feared Saruman might do, to destroy nature? She has a history of this sort of thing. Her husband Aula crafted the dwarves, and she thought they might chop down a few too many trees. So she lobbied for the ants to also be created to protect the trees. And Radagast did undoubtedly do his part in protecting nature, and his relationship with the eagles led directly to Gandalf being able to escape from Orthax, so perhaps she had some foresight there anyway. Although these 5 Maya were sent as an order, when they got there, they very clearly weren't working together. The blue wizards as friends stuck together, but headed off east, and as far as we can tell, had no further contact with Gandalf or Radagast. Saruman had a particularly disdainful attitude towards Radagast, and an antipathy towards Gandalf. Radagast largely kept to himself, and although Gandalf forged a strong set of allies, he made a point of not settling down anywhere or seeking much by way of aid. Noticeably, when the White Council of the Wise and the Good of Middle-earth was set up, only Gandalf and Saruman were members, and even then, many years seemed to go by without any contact between those 2. They were an order, but again, Tolkien doesn't really elaborate on what that means. 2 things stand out here though, their colours and their staffs. A wizard's staff is clearly important to them, perhaps as some kind of focus for their magic, but it is clearly not needed in order for a wizard to perform magic. Gandalf's staff broke when facing the Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm. but she went on to defeat it in combat later anyway. Instead, it seems primarily here to be a symbol of a wizard's authority when Gandalf, now Gandalf the White, casts Saruman from the Order. He says that your staff is broken, and it breaks, after which he says that Saruman still has some power, particularly if he stays in Orang and in the power of his voice, but his authority is gone. In the same vein, the colour of the wizards seems to be not so much a fashion choice as a reflection of who they are. Radagast's brown matches his love of nature. Gandalf's grey is his humility, and perhaps the dust of the road as he travels so much. Saruman's white is goodness or purity. He is the head of this order sent by the Valar after all. When he abandons that, he adopts new colours. Saruman of many colours he calls himself, and when Gandalf returns as the White, he declares himself to be Saruman, as he should have been. Gandalf is taking on the authority and the position of Saruman, so in a way, the Istari's mission was compromised from the start. Rivalries and bad relationships between them, some sent specifically to counter the presence of others, little apparent effort to work together once they were there, and so on. And the Valar also made things harder for the reasons we covered a moment ago by making the Istari have to take on the bodies of old men who, like normal mortals, would grow tired and hungry and world-weary. Contrary to what some people assume this means the Istari did age physically, Tolkien tells us that they aged only by the cares and labours of many long years, and that they always appeared old but grew older with their labours. Slowly, we actually see this when Gandalf returns to see Frodo, after being gone for many years, hunting for Gollum. Frodo thinks that Gandalf looks older and more careworn, understandable, given he knows the end of his mission, and the final battle with Sauron is now fast approaching. And on a much longer time frame, we're told that when he arrived in Middle-earth, Saruman had black hair, but by the time of the Lord of the Rings, it was nearly all White knew who and what they were and what their mission was. But memories of the Blessed Realm were blurred to them, and the Istari were, it should I hope be apparent, that they were all very fallible. 3 of the 5 fell in various ways. 1 disappeared when the final confrontation was at hand. And even Gandalf, who obviously stuck by his commission, was far from perfect. He forgot things and got things wrong, and was sometimes a little bit grumpy, even with those he cared about. But despite all these encumbrances and negatives, there is no doubt that the Five Istari were among the most powerful and influential figures of the Third Age. The story of the Lord of the Rings would have been very different without Gandalf or Saruman Radagast played his part too, when even the Blue Wizards were said in one account to have had many successes in the East before their eventual fall, which leads us to the conclusion that they must also have been some of the most powerful beings in the Fourth Age of Middle-earth, in the centuries that followed the Lord of the Rings. We often talk about how in the Fourth Age, the powerful magical beings stepped back, and the dominion of man began, which is true. Gandalf, Eland, Galadriel, and other powerful elves left for the Blessed Realm. Sauron, Saruman, Smaug, the Balrog, and the Nazgul were all vanquished. Humans were in the ascendancy, but a handful of powerful beings did still remain. The Watcher in the water survived, as did the nameless things deep, deep underground, and Shelob, and some lesser dragons in the far north, and Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, of course, were always the exception. But we also have 3 Maiar alive and well and powerful, Radagast and the Blue Wizards. Radagast, I suspect, did not intervene much in the matters of men, but the Blue Wizards did. The influence of the Istari lived on.